Welcome back. Arrays are one of the most powerful yet simple and useful data structures that JavaScript offers us, and yeah, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into them and teach you more about arrays. And so let's just get started. And so today we're going to be talking about what's an array, the type of array, in a sense, what does it return and why, how to check if something is an array, if a variable is an array, using the isArray method, some ways to access the values that arrays store using brackets, or also how to set the values inside that array using bracket assignment. And then, some basic things that you're going to need when you are later on looping through all the values in an array. For example, you're going to need the .length property, which will tell you how many elements are in the array. And then we'll also discuss some basic methods that arrays give to us. And so, let's get started. So, what is an array? Well, an array is a list-like data structure in JavaScript. It is when we use the term data structure, what we mean is it is a structure that that basically helps you organize lots of data. A variable is also a data structure, but a variable is a very simple data structure that only holds essentially one piece of data. Of course, an array is also can also be held by a variable, but inside an array you can hold a lot of things. Arrays can also hold other arrays. It can hold objects. It's a great way to send a function a lot of data at once instead of making lots of different parameters. And so arrays are really cool. You can do a lot of stuff with them. A really simple array just looks like this, which is just a bunch of numbers. There is you can see there are open and closed brackets there that define the beginning and ending of an array, and there are three elements in that array, just the numbers 1, 2, and 3. And numbers is the name of the array itself. You can also store other things in the array. You can store strings. So here we're storing three string names. You can also store kind of a mixed bag of things in an array. So you can see that we made a variable, just a simple string called a value, and we were able to store basically 5 different types of values inside of the array. And so each value in an array is called an element. And so there are 5 elements in that array. And that's it. So I'm gonna get back into our coding mode. We'll get to kind of play around a little bit with arrays and kind of get to actually try things out. And so let's move into our coding. And so the first thing I want to do is talk about what happens when you type of an array. Okay, and so I'm just going to define a simple array. Let's do let names equal George, John, and Scott. Okay. And so if we simply just console log names, let's see what happens. So I'm just going to run it here, and you'll see on the right side that we get George, John, and Scott. By the way, I've made a nice little shortcut to let me run this file very quickly. And that's also why you see these 2 lines up here. This tells it tells the terminal to use the Node engine, which runs JavaScript, and this is just a little quick character that lets you clear the console. I wouldn't worry too much about these lines. These are just kind of standard. I'm just going to hide them. So you can see that we defined an array with the name names and gave it these 3 names, and when we console log it, we got these 3 names out. Now, what happens if we were to instead console log type of the names variable? Okay, so let's try that. And when we do type of names, we get object. Now, that's a little weird, isn't it? Like, shouldn't we be getting, wouldn't we think that we should get a array? Well, the problem is that that an array is actually a object of the type array. So in JavaScript, the word object is used for to mean a few different things. In this case, when you an array is actually an object. It's actually represented as an object inside JavaScript, and so like the type of the array variable is actually object. However, you can use it like an array. And so I'm going to leave it there. I think as you work more with objects and as we talk about objects more in the future lectures, you will get a little bit of a stronger understanding. But for now, just understand that when you type of an array, you're going to get object, and so don't be confused by that. Next thing I want to introduce is the isArray method. And so this was so let's comment this out, and let's do array.isArray method. So now isArray is a method to check if a variable is an array, right? Surprising. And so let's keep using the names array, and let's see how this method works. So if we do console.log array.isArray, and then we pass in the names array to it, and let's see what we get. And actually, let's also try to give array.isArray something that's not an array. So let's say we just give it like a plain string, like hello string. And we run this, and you'll see that we get true and false, right? Which means that we're getting true, like this first console log is giving us true, and the second console log is giving us false. And so of course, because names is an array, we are getting true for that, and hello is not an array, so we're getting. And so it turns out that this is the right way to check if something is an array, right? And like earlier when we saw type of, I mean, this is the easiest and most obvious and readable way. Like earlier when we saw type of names here, we were getting object, and that can be kind of confusing, and that can actually mean a lot of things. And so, you don't want to, if you really want to check if something is an array, you don't want to do something like, if type of names equals object, right? That's not a great way. And so, I would really use this this kind of class method on that array has called isArray. Okay. So let's move on from that. So I'm just going to console log this stuff, and so. Now, our next, the next thing that I really want to go into is bracket access. And bracket access is really the most common way that you can access elements inside an array. Okay, it'll be, this will come to you very simply. But the only tricky thing about bracket access is that the counting starts from 0. So, for example, what if we wanted to console.log the first element of the names array, right? You would think that it would be something like names 1, right? And now notice we're using 2 brackets here to indicate that we want to extract the value of the first element, right? Now, of course, you would think that this will give you the first element, right? Sorry, so let's just try and see what we actually get. So when we do console log names 1, we actually get John, which turns out is the second element, right? So, this is how JavaScript and a lot of programming works, is that with arrays or with a lot of things, this is a 0 indexed counting, and so 0 is the first element, so you have to do name 0 to get the first one. You can see we got George here. The reason that things are 0 indexed is not because, I mean, you would think programmers are just crazy and they just want to, they just want to make things difficult. But that's not really why. Like a long time ago, when arrays were, in a sense, introduced, they were introduced in a language that was a slightly lower level language called a C, or some other languages as well. And there, the way that arrays were represented were by pointers. And so let's say the variable names would point to literally the first element of the array. So now imagine if you have spots in your memory, right? And each spot in your memory can store one element of the array. The initial names, the name of the array, all it does is it holds the address of the first element, okay? And then this bracket notation here tells the compiler how many jumps to make from that first element and get that value. So you can see that, because names points to the first element, it would require 0 jumps for us to reach the first element, right? And so that's where the term 0, that's why we put 0 here to access the first element. If we want to get to the second element, we would have to make 1 jump from the first element, right, to get to the second one. And so that's why this is 1. And so, that's really the reason why things are 0 indexed. In JavaScript, we don't have to think about that as much. And so we really have to just remember that arrays are 0 indexed. And so if you want to access the first element, you use 0. If you want to access the second element, you use 1. Let's say we want to access the last element, we could use 2. But later we'll also learn about a slightly smarter way to access the last element of every array. And the only reason is that you don't actually know what the last element. You don't know how long the array is always. And so you can't just hard code, we can't just say, if we want to access the last element of the array, we can't just say names2, because what if somebody adds, what if we add a name to this array, right? Now names2 will not be the last element, it'll actually be the second last element. And so there's another way for us to get the last element. And we'll talk about that as well. So while we're on the topic of brackets, you can also use brackets to actually assign values in the array. So now, let's say we wanted to change the first name in the names array to be David instead of George. So we could say names0 equals David, right? And so now, if we console log names, we should have this first value changed to David, as you can see here. Okay, cool. And so it's pretty simple. You can do the same with any element. So if you want to replace the third element in the array with David, you would essentially do names2 equals David. And so if you run that, you can see now the third element has been changed to David. Okay, so this is how you can use the bracket notation to set values, and you can also use it to get values out of the array. The other nomenclature that I want to introduce here is that this number that we are using in between the brackets, this is called the index. It's called the index in the array. So the index refers to the position of different values in an array. Okay, so that's why arrays are, we say arrays are 0 indexed, which means that they start at the index of 0. This will actually come in handy later, because because a lot of times I see beginners confuse index and value. And so, if the index may be 2, but the value would be Scott or David, depending on if this line had run, right? So the index of this value is 0, the index of this value is 1, but the value is John here, for example. Okay. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next thing. So now, remember I had mentioned a couple of minutes ago about how you can get the last element of the array. Well, the way you get the last element is by using, so let me comment this out, so is by using something called the dot length property of an array. So let's just move all this down so we can keep coding here. And so if we want to know how long an array is, JavaScript gives us a built-in property to do that easily. So we can say the property is called dot length. So we can say console log and this will this will, dot length is a number that is the total length of the array. It's not the index of the last element, right? It's the actual total length. So in this case, the total length is 4, right? Even though the index of the last element is 3, the length is 4. And so if we run this, you'll see that this returns 4. Now, if we wanted to access the last element of the array, could we do names and then put names.length as an index? If I try running that, you'll see what happens is that we get undefined. Because as you know, because arrays are 0 indexed, the last index is actually 1 less than the length, right? So the length here is 4, which means the last index would be 3 because of the 0 index. So then whenever you want to access the last element of an array, you have to do names.length minus 1. And so this length minus 1 will give you the right index for the last element, for the last element in the array. So let me try running this, and we get the last element here, which was Nimit. So that's it. Yeah, you don't actually. So the other thing to remember is that the dot length is a property of an array. It's not a function that you can run on the array. So you don't do names.length like this, right? So it's not a function. It's just a property. So you can access it directly, just like this. Okay. All right, great. So let's move on to the next topic. So next, I want to introduce you to a few simple functions that let you add and subtract things from arrays. Now, we just saw how bracket notation can be used to assign values to an array. Well, in bracket notation, you have to provide the exact spot in which you want to store something, right? Like, what if you just wanted to add something to the end of the array? Like, let's say you were building an array in a loop or something, and you just wanted to put something at the end of the array, right? Well, for that, JavaScript gives us the push method. Right, like this. And so if we wanted to add one more name to our names array, we could do names.push, and then let's put the name Jane. Okay, and so now if we console.log names, we will get, so we should have Jane also added to our array, as you can see here. Make sense? And so that's it. So just remember the word push. You can think of it as like pushing something at the end of a line or a list. And so yeah. Okay. Now the next method is, what if we wanted to get something off the end of the array, right? So like if you imagine that there is if you imagine that there is a line and you want to take something off the end of the line, and so it's a little bit, it's like the most recent. So like so the next method I want to introduce you to is pop. So this method is not as commonly used as the push, but it is used once in a while. So this basically allows you to remove the most recent, remove and return the most recently added item to the array, right? So if you want to say names dot, so let's say we just added Jane. Now, if we wanted to get Jane off, we could say let latest add equals names dot pop. All right. So if we do names.pop, this will give us the latest item that was added to the array, and so then let's do a couple of things where we say we try to so let's move console.log down here, and then let's also output latest add. Okay, so essentially we're going to so we first push Jane here, right? So we started out with this name, with this list of names. Then we pushed Jane. Then we popped. Then all we did is just run the pop method, right? So and actually Okay. And now all we're doing is console logging what was the latest add, which was what we got right here, and then what the total, what the final array is. So let me just run this whole thing again, and let's walk through the output. So we got Jane here, which means the first console log here was latest add. So the word Jane was popped off of this list, and then now the array itself, you'll realize, is actually, so we actually removed the last item. It's not just that we access the last item, right? If we just wanted to access the last item, we would have done what we looked at here, which is names and names.length -1, right? Pop actually accesses it, and it also removes it. And so keep that in mind, okay? And we can actually do this with, we can add another name here. So let's add Emily. And now you'll see I changed nothing else about the code. And if I run this again, that we removed, so the latest add was Emily, and you can see the array now has Jane, but it doesn't have Emily. Okay? Okay, cool. So let's keep going. We'll comment out these, and let's keep going. Okay, so let's move down here. And so now let's talk about another method called shift. So now shift is very similar to pop, except it removes the first element instead, right? And so if we were to console log names at this point, so if we were to console log names, we would get the following, right? And let's actually remove this pop also. So we'll get these 6 names, right? Because we have 2 pushes here. Now, if we do shift, what we'll get is the first. It's similar to pop, except the first element comes out. So we can say let first element equals names dot shift. Okay, and so if we console log first L removed, we should get George removed. And now if we console log names, we should see that George is removed. All right, so I'm going to run this again. Now you see in the first console log we have all 6 names here. In the second console log we removed George, and so this variable got George, and this is what happened to the array afterward. Okay, so shift is similar to pop, except it's just the first element. Okay, and so similarly to shift. So earlier we saw the function push actually added something to the end of the array. Well, let me show you how to add something to the beginning of the array, and that's with the unshift method. Add to array. Right, so shift method pops something from beginning. Unshift method adds to the beginning of the array. So let's just follow the same concept here, where let's output what we have in names right now, and then let's do something. I'm just setting this up so I can. Okay, so we'll console log names, and let's add a new name to the beginning of to the beginning of this. So let's add the name. Let's add the name Amit, which is a people often confuse my name to be. So okay, so what we'll see when we run this is that we'll see what names array is, then we'll unshift, then we'll see what happens to the array after the unshift, right? So you can see that the array started off this way. And all we did is add Amit to the beginning, and so simple enough. Cool. So next, I want to walk you through the idea of finding inside the array, right? So like, what if we have an array and we want to find So I'll actually just leave all the people we're adding in there. So what if we have the array and we want to simply find something in the array? So we want to see does, for example, George exist inside the names array, right? So the way that you do this in JavaScript is by using the index of method. And index of is also an array method and works the same way as a string method of the same name. And so index of, the way it works is that you essentially call it on the array in the same way that we were calling the other methods. So we can say so let's just see what it returns, right? So we'll do console.log names.index of, and then let's put George in here, and then see what we get. Okay, so we got 1. Now, what exactly does this mean? Does that mean that it was found? No. What index of returns is the location or the index of where it was able to find something. So clearly it found George in the essentially the second element of the array, or the index 1 in the array, right? And so because we know that this was 1, now if I were to do console log names 1, we should also see George, right? And so that's what index of means. Now, what does index of return if it doesn't find the element? Let's say we search for Jack, right? I don't think Jack is in our array. So if you search for Jack, index of returns -1. And so that's essentially how you can use index of. It's like you can, if something is found, it will return the index. If something is not found, then it will return -1. And so this is actually a very convenient thing to use in an if statement to try to find something. So for example, we can say like if names index of Jack is greater than -1, then we know for sure that Jack is not found. Then we can say log person not found. And so for example, let's say equals Jack. So just make this a little bit more. Okay, so this way you can see that let's find the person in the names array. If they are found, then if it's greater than -1, that means they will be found. So we'll say person found, and then else we'll say not found, and that's it. So you can see that Jack not found, but if we say Amit, the latest person we added, we can see that Amit was found, right? And if we really wanted to make this customized, then we could also add the actual person's name in the console log, but I think you all get the point. Okay, so let's move. So hopefully you feel comfortable with index of, but yeah. So the next method that I want to talk to you all about is slice. And so what slice does is that it extracts a portion of the array for you, right? So let's just play around with it a little bit. So let's say we do names.slice, and let's say we'll do 0, 1. Okay, if we run that, we see that like we found Amit, and let's actually add a couple of other things here. Do 0, 2, and we'll say 1, 2. Okay, so you can kind of see how this works, right? So slice essentially gives you a certain slice of the array, And the first two parameters here are where the slices are made. And so you can imagine if the array was, a big sandwich or something, like you would be cutting it at certain places and then, returning the cut part of the array. So in the first one, you start at the index 0, and then you make the cut right before the kind of the first element, which is actually the second element. So all that results in is the first element of the array, right? Then in the next one, we do 0 to 2, so we get the first two elements. The next one, we start the cut at 1, and then end it at 2, so we get the second element of the array, right? And so it's easier to see if you, so let's say, we can even do a couple other examples. I mean, so this method and others like this are actually very easy to understand even from the documentation. But you can see that, when I did 1 to 3, we got the second and third person in our array. Now, one thing that's really cool with slice is that if you just pass it just one slice, what it will do is it'll return the rest of the array. So like, if you say slice 1, we'll slice it right after or essentially right before the first index, and then return everything after that. And so that's what you see, that this slice 1 here returned the entire array without Amit, who was in the beginning of the array. Okay. Okay. Cool. So that's so that is slice. All right. And so that is slice for actually. Okay. Actually, I want to point out one other cool thing about slice. So something kind of weird that slice is used for. So let me actually show you what happens when I just pass in nothing to slice. Okay, I'm going to run this, and if I pass in nothing, notice that I got a copy of the whole array back, right? Now, what's really unique about slice is that it actually makes a new copy of the array, even if it returns the same thing. When you pass in nothing, it returns slice actually creates a brand new copy of the array. So let's say, and the way that we can actually see this is that if we were going to, so say we have the names already. Now let's say we make a new variable called names copy, and we set it equal to names.slice, and then we modify names copy. We modify the first element to be Kate. Then let's see what happens, because we would this I mean it may not be that surprising, I guess, but you'll see that names remains unchanged. So then after this we'll do console.log names, and then names copy. Okay, so notice that this was the original names, and when we changed something in names copy, it only changed this. It didn't change the original names, and so so slice is actually a very convenient way to make a copy of something, of an array rather. Okay. All right, so let's continue. The next thing that I want to mention is a slightly more, I would say, sophisticated way to check if something is in the array. Earlier we had discussed the index of method, which you'll see a lot actually. And the index of method used to be the most common way to check if something is in the array. But if you but there's an includes method. Also now, which actually makes this a little bit easier to read. So for example, so we have the names, and so we can say console log names that includes, let's just say Nimit. So because we know that, earlier we saw that, or here we see that names does have Nimit. So this should include true, and I'm pretty sure names does not have, we can see over there names does not have David, and so this second one should return false, and so true and false. And so this is also a very easy way to check if something is in the names array. Okay, another cool method that I want to point out is the reverse method. Now, reverse is a you got to be careful with that, because reverse actually modifies the array itself. It doesn't make a new copy. Okay, so let's say we have so we have the names array right now, right? So we have the names array, which is this. Now, let's do names.reverse, and then again console log names, and let's see what we get. Now, notice I didn't have to do names equals names reverse, because names.reverse does not return anything. It just reverses in place. And so notice what we got. So the first iteration, this was the original one. Once we reverse it, it becomes this. And then from then on, it remains reversed, right? So I can do console.log names 0 now. And while earlier it was Amit, now the first name will be Emily, right? As we saw here. And so reverse can be, it can come in handy, and this is it's a good method to keep in mind. The important thing about it though is that it reverses in place. It doesn't return anything, and so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, that's it. So I hope that this was a pretty good introduction to arrays for you, and if you do want to, if you do have future kind of array questions, I would actually check out the MDN array. So if you look at this browser here, all I've searched is JavaScript arrays, and you can see that there, like the first link that we get here is the Mozilla Developer Network array documentation. And here you can see tons and tons of methods that are available on arrays. I mean, we introduced you to a few of them, but you can see there are a ton of them. And for each one, like you can actually, we just talked about reverse. If you go to that documentation, you can actually see what it does and how it works. And there's a ton of there's a ton of pretty cool methods that will help you work with arrays. And so that's it. Let's get to do just want to do a quick recap of what we've looked at so far. So we talked about what an array is. We talked about the fact that type of array returns object. That array.isArray is the right way to check if something is an array. We looked at bracket access and bracket assignment, so how to access the value at a certain index and how to get the value out at that index. We also looked at using the .length property to know how long the array is, and also actually using the .length property to get the last element of the array. And then we talked about a bunch of really cool kind of useful methods that you can use on arrays to get out, just to make them very useful. Like, you'll find that you'll find that arrays are actually extremely useful, and they're extremely common in JavaScript. They're used all the time, and getting comfortable with arrays is pretty helpful. One word of caution I would say is that sometimes I see that early JavaScript developers tend to use arrays all the time when often you could use just two variables, for example. So you don't always need an array for everything. Arrays are good when you have either a very large number of a very large number of values that you want to store in one place, or just a ton of even known values that you want to store. But if you just have like one, like if you just sometimes you can just do with like two variables, and so you don't really need a huge array for that. So all right, until next time, we actually are going to follow up in the next lecture with diving a little deeper into arrays, and so until then we will talk soon.